to recognize that whoever it is you're having a conversation with is not really the only person you're having a conversation with. They are bringing to that conversation all the experiences of their life and many of their ancestors' experiences. So the ways in which they may be limited or triggerable or hurt or hiding or eager or ways in which they're very healthy and open and excited are not just theirs and theirs alone. And so when we are engaging with each other, it might look on the transcript like you said this and they said that. But that's not really what happened. Somewhere, even in what's happening between you and me right now, there's something else, which is not written. You didn't describe it anywhere. I didn't authorize it or describe it anywhere, but somewhere between us, there are limits that are unspoken, they're tacit, they're implicit about what it is, who it is we can be with each other, how we talk to each other. Right. And that's different when you're talking to me than when you're talking to someone else. And there's nowhere to point to and say, this is why.
You are listening to the Perspective Podcast. This is a space for you who are longing to come back home, deeper into your own center and your own truth. This is a space for you who are longing to deepen the relationship to yourself and to others. My name is Madeleine Mofjärd, and in this space I invite you to explore conversations that in different ways touch us upon the human experience. And I'm here to invite new perspectives. Hi and welcome, Nora Bateson, to the Perspective Podcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So honored to have you here with me today, Nora. It feels like we've been trying to schedule this interview for a long time, and now finally we're sitting here together. So I'm so excited to have you here, and the aim and sort of my curiosity for this conversation with you and for your work sort of boils down to why systemic understanding matters when it comes to change and transformation. So I find my curiosity leaning towards those topics today. But I do would like to check in with you before diving into that topic. How is your heart today, Nora, and how is the experience of being Nora today as we're sitting here?
That's an interesting question. Well, I am in a system of a system. I am a system, if system is the word you want to use. And of course, I think like a lot of people, especially in these times, there's pressures from many other systems that are making our personal lives rather intense in either learning or the pain that is sort of going to bring the learning, or trying to figure out how to be in relationship with each other in a way that allows everybody to learn and change and move. And it's interesting because I think for me, one of the things that's going on right now is my mother died not long ago. And I thought I was so prepared for that. She was 95. She'd lived a beautiful, full life. I mean, I don't know anybody who's lived a more beautiful or more full life. She went everywhere. She did everything. She did it all. But still, her her death has brought a real shift in the shape of my world
Mm.
that I wasn't anticipating. Um, you like to think you're living independently and that your world is just your world, and in a sense it is. But when it comes to people who have, like parents who've been in your frame forever,
Mm.
and then when they're not there, your frame is different. And I think that's kind of what I'm exploring right now, is how different my um my the scaffolding of my world is, how different the 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 walls are. The walls have moved, and they're always moving. It's never static, but this is a big one.
Mm. Mm. Wow, thank you for sharing that process and inviting us to that inner landscape of yours. It means a lot to be sort of invited to that place, and I think it's relatable in many different levels. It touches, yeah, upon many different perspectives, what you're sharing. I mean, for the listeners who does not know about you or your work since before, is there anything that you feel like is necessary for them to know about you before we dive into this conversation even deeper?
Well, I guess necessary. I don't know. I mean, I think if we're going to be talking about systemic perception and perspectives, um, then it's definitely, I think, a good idea to bring in the intergenerational work that's in that field.
Mm.
So it goes back a couple of generations and it goes forward generations. So my grandfather began work looking at biological change, evolutionary change through a systemic lens in the 1800s. And then my father was one of the people who really helped systems theory to become systems theory, with the the Macy conferences and all, but long before the Macy conferences, they were already working on this. And then my sister as well, Mary Catherine Bateson. Um, and then there's my work, and I've written a couple of books now and made some movies and done quite a bit of kind of trying to find new language, recognizing how important it is to have different concepts that reside in different ways of expressing them, because otherwise our ideas get caught in the baggage of the language. So I have developed warm data, a theory called semathesy, which is about mutual learning, systemic mutual learning, and aphanipoesis, which is another theory having to do with how things coalesce in unseen ways to
Mm.
make change. Um, and uh, that's sort of, I guess that's the basis of it. The warm data work has become pretty widespread. I think there's over 1,000 warm data hosts in the world now,
Mm.
all over, and it's wonderful to see it moving out there and seeing. I was just on the phone a moment ago with a group of kids who are starting um, warm data for younger generations in schools, and that makes me really happy.
Mm. Wow,
So
that's impressive. Yeah.
yeah.
Would you like to share a little bit more about warm data? Maybe like what is the driving force, the intention, what's the aim with warm data and the
Mm-hmm.
work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. I made a film about my father, Gregory Bateson, who I mentioned was one of the founders of this idea of system thinking as it applies to Western science. Okay. So let's be very clear. Systems thinking is not something that is new. It's, first of all, even in the scientific realm, it came in the, well, my grandfather was doing it in the 1800s, but this is still ridiculous. Every ancient culture everywhere was doing systemic work. They didn't call it that. They called it life. They called it cosmos. They called it all sorts of things. But from the Taoists to the Rig Vedas to every indigenous culture basically understood that things move in interdependent ways. So after I made this film about my father, I took it on the road. And it wasn't a film that even the distributors knew what to do with. They asked, is this a biographical film? Is this a science film? Is this a eco-activism film? What is this film? And because they couldn't figure out which box to put it in, they didn't really want to be responsible for distribution of it, which was ironic because it won a lot of awards. But no one knew where to put it. So, and this happened in whatever it was, 2010, 2011. And at that point, Facebook was sort of at the big, not the beginning, but it was just humming along. And it wasn't quite the monolithic monster that it has become. But at that point, I just said, hey, I made a film about my dad, and people would write to me and they would say, can you come and screen it in our town? And I would say, sure, just rent a theater and I'll come. And so people who I had never met before all over the world did a thing they'd never done before and organized a theater screening or an event at a local theater. Um, and I would come to their town and we would screen the film and have a conversation. And everywhere I went, what I saw was that there were wonderful people doing wonderful work at the at the at the highest possible integrity that they could muster. Um, and yet there was a block. And even though there were plenty of staged interdisciplinary conversations, the interdisciplinarity was blocked. And it was blocked because largely the research was taking place in one discipline or another, through one angle of a university context or another. And this was sort of, giving credence and authorization to the information. But in doing so, it was also creating a reductionism into which it was impossible to speak with any kind of authorization in an interdisciplinary way. So if you are a doctor, you have no business talking about schools. If you are a teacher, you have no business talking about bacteria in the body. If you are a politician, you have no business talking about childbirth. If you're a mom, you have no business talking about the stock market. So everybody wanted to have an interdisciplinary conversation, but they couldn't. And I even was part of this group that set up this fantastic 3-day workshop at CERN that was supposed to be 42 artists and scientists from around the world. And we're going to have a conversation. Where are we in evolution? Okay. It was a great 3 days, but maybe the most incredible epic failure I ever saw, because all these wonderful people came together, and in the culture of reductionism, the only thing that they could each do was really substantiate and kind of give as much information as possible about why they were credible in their field. And this does not make a systemic conversation. All right. You might as well be channel surfing. But they couldn't leave their field because that was where they had their credentials and their authorization. So professionally, it's dangerous to leave your mark. to leave your spot. So after a while, I started to really realize that part of what was happening was that the information upon which other information was built was actually produced through reductionist forms of research. Now, I have nothing against reductionism. Reductionism is fine as long as you remember it's reductionism. And also, always looking for the big system, the big holistic process can ironically become very reductionistic because there's a lot of information that's not in the big picture either. So, and living in a world in which that is the toggle. Are you going to do holism or are you going to do reductionism? That in itself is a reductionism. So I started to realize that the issue was around the question of information. What is information? How do we produce information? How do we know that it's information? How do we verify information? What is this? And so that was where warm data came in, because I felt that it was important to reach for something that the scientific method could not hold, right? So in the 1600s, this methodology came to be that was really important, okay, because it kept us from being caught in the whims of kings and priests and people who would tell us that the world was flat and that there were, witches were evil or whatever. And in that methodology, there are a couple of criteria. All right. One is that you have to be able to repeat the research. You have to be able to get the results in more than one place, at more than one time, in more than one laboratory. And you need to be able to measure those results. And you need to be able to define. You need to be objective. Objectivity is a big issue. Now, if you look at how you're going to study a complex living system, what becomes pretty clear is that none of those criteria are going to work for you. You can't get the same result twice because the system is changing. And you can't measure them because if you measure them, you're going to measure out one context or one bit. And in doing so, you're going to actually eliminate or obscure your understanding of all the other bits. And you'll never be objective. It's impossible to be objective. Who wrote the survey? Who asked the questions? Who funded the research? Who's analyzing it? In what culture did this set of questions make sense? In what system did this sort of funding make sense? What is the logic of all of these different aspects of even where we're looking, how we're looking, the language we're looking in, the cultural responsibility of recognizing how limited that actually is. So in all of that, and I'll give you an example. This is an example that I use in my courses, but also it's just good because you need an example. If you have a family and you say, okay, we're going to study this family. Where is the family? Is the family the house? Is it the culture? Is it the parents? Is it the children? Is it the grandparents? Is it the religion? Is the family the same today as it was yesterday? No. Are the relationships between the members of the family the same as they were yesterday? No. And if you ask each member of the family to describe the family, will you get the same description? No. And if you do it 4 days from now, will it be the same? No. So all of these positionings are constantly responding to each other. And that's the piece that seems to be missing in both this idea of holism and the idea of reductionism is the movement, the moving aspect, that my relationship with my mother, even though she's dead now, is moving. It's changing. It's not a static thing that I can plot in a model. It's moving. And my relationship with my mother moving is changing my relationship with my kids. My kids' relationship with me changing is changing their relationship with their friends, family, partners, whatever. So all of these responses to responses to responses, that's where the information is. But that's what I call warm data, and it won't sit nicely on a page. You can't harvest it. You can't put it down in a report in prose. It will be wiggly, slippery, slimy. It's moving. It's alive. So the concept with warm data is that it's information that is transcontextual, multiple contexts of things happening at the same time, responding from each other, to each other, with each other. And how will we actually be able to be in a living world if the information that we are using to make sense of that world is not also alive?
Mm.
So warm data is information that's alive.
Mm. Wow. I love the way that you describe it and talk about it. I think what comes to me is also how in the beginning of the conversation I used the word systemic, and like the intention that I set and that we set for the conversation was to talk about the systemic understanding and why it matters. And you said in one sentence like, yeah, if that's the word you want to use. And so I'm wondering, like, is warm data your way of sort of like changing the word of the systemic understanding, or like how, yeah, if we play with the word systemic, or
Mm,
maybe even to put it in a better way, like for the listeners who are not sure, like what does even systemic understanding mean,
mm-hmm.
like maybe that's a better way to put the question. What does that word mean to you, and how does it sort of yeah, intertwine with warm data?
Yeah. Okay. But this is a bit of a rabbit hole you've just jumped into. So here's the thing, is that there are words that carry cultural movements. Okay. At this point, systems thinking, systemic thought, systemic practice is a trope. Okay. It's not really the word that it is anymore. It's a portal to a whole different kind of practice, a culture of change makers, a way of addressing everything from coaching to therapy to um, thinking about economies and community welfare, etc. Um, so I grew up in a household where the word system meant something very different than it means now. So for me, the word system means something slippery and gooey and moving and learning and changing, and that has multiple contexts of things happening in it, like the family I was just describing, like a meadow, like a um, any kind of ecosystem, like your body. Okay, so your body doesn't run on money, but if you have a big economic problem, that economic problem will make a pressure into your body, right? Your body is not part of the political system, but political ideas and laws affect your body. Your body has a nervous system and all sorts of cognitive systems, and you can dream and you can make love and you can eat food and you have a microbiome, and all of these systems are working together. But in the way that I learned about systems was to be in awe of the way that they are constantly shifting each other. And that awe has to do with the details, the minutia of the way small patterns of relational process shift and change and move all kinds of other things. Um, for me, this has always been a deep rigor, and it came from my family to not look for a way to control or manage or define that process. For a lot of other people, and even in the word system coming from Greek is to arrange, it's an arrangement. So if it were systeming, it would make more sense to me because it would be arranging. But when it's system, something happened to time in the concept of systemic work that looks for a way in which there is something static we can point to and define and understand and manage and control. And then we can tweak, change, alter, maneuver, manipulate into a position that is more favorable to what we think might be good. This is not how I learned about systems. Systems, in the way that I learned about them, are living processes, and you must not manipulate them. Right? So that urge to control, to manage, to change, to tweak, to direct comes from a misunderstanding of the rigor, of the depth of the work that's needed to actually hold the dance of life in your perception in a way that is not about changing it. It's about participating in your membership in a way that allows other things to shift.
Mm.
Okay, this is a very significant difference. And oh, you know, I don't really like the word system. And also I live in the word system. So I'm not going to throw it out, but I'm also going to call a little bit of attention to it. Be careful that you're not talking about this when people talk about, ecology of computer platforms. I'm not okay with that. That's not an ecology, you know? Um, so what is a system? And ultimately, I think what we're talking about is just the way life makes life. I wish we could call it that. And
Mm.
also, system's a perfectly good word, and it has a lot of history. And I'm very much, in the living legacy of that history. So, uh, I'm hopeful that as time goes on, there's a deeper understanding of what contextual and transcontextual moving, combining looks like, feels like.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm hopeful also that, I mean, the work that you're doing, the work that your family's doing, these conversations that are being more spread into the world, I think that's so powerful and meaningful that the knowledge sort of reaches more people out there. And something that I'm curious about is because I've heard you talk in other conversations and other contexts about how sort of the in-between spaces. So what
Mhm.
happens in between yeah, situations or contexts or whatever. Um, could you give us some examples when it comes to like communication or relating or yeah, that kind of approach? What could be some examples of things that can happen in the in-between space that are sort of examples of the warm data that we
Mhm.
might not be able to sort of put the finger on or
Mhm.
yeah. Do
I
you
mean,
get the question? Yeah.
yeah, I do. And I
Mm.
think we all see it every day. And every relationship that we're in, every moment of communication is not really about the thing you think you're communicating about. And one of the ways in which it's become, I think, interesting in the kind of popular discourse, there's a lot of talk about trauma. And to recognize that whoever it is you're having a conversation with is not really the only person you're having a conversation with. They are bringing to that conversation all the experiences of their life and many of their ancestors' experiences. So the ways in which they may be um, limited or triggerable or hurt or hiding or um, eager or ways in which they're very healthy and open and excited are not just theirs and theirs alone. And so when we are engaging with each other, it might look on the transcript like you said this and they said that. Um, but that's not really what happened. Somewhere, even in what's happening between you and me right now, there's something else, which is not written. It's you didn't describe it anywhere. I didn't authorize it or describe it anywhere, but somewhere between us, there are limits that are unspoken, they're tacit, they're implicit about what it is, who it is we can be with each other, what how we talk to each other,
Mm.
right? And that's different when you're talking to me than when you're talking to someone else. And there's nowhere to point to and say this is why, except it just kind of is.
Mm.
And so there's 1,000 ways in which in each of our relationships in our lives, our communication is caught in lots of different patterns that are not even in that relationship. So, be careful when you come in and you have an assumption of how someone is. Is it really that someone? Or is it a lot of the context that they are carrying?
Mm.
And if you're going to be in communication with them, instead of thinking, how do I win this conversation, which is a strange thing, but that thing exists. How do I win a conversation? What the hell is that? But um, I mean, then it's not a conversation, right?
And how does the win look like?
What did you get? Yeah. But I see it. I see it. There's this ecology of communication that doesn't get tended because if you put this online, there could be comments and someone's going to say, oh, yeah, I really like her work. Or, oh my gosh, I can't understand a thing she says. Why is she always talking about this? Or she doesn't know what she's talking about. Or, the need to take a side. Um, yeah. So
Mm.
here we are. What's in our communication? What are the ways in which that happens? So if let's say I'm with someone and they say to me something and I say, I don't think that's true. I think you're lying to me. And I need to let them know that I have perceived that what they're saying isn't true. But the second I do that, I've put them in a position where they probably have to lie again, right? So I didn't open the possibility of our sharing another kind of communication by calling them out on their lie. On the other hand, if people think they're getting away with lying to you, they get the impression that they're cleverer than you and that you're actually believing what they say, which is not true. So it's a form of lying also, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah.
So that's one of the little ones. There's a way in which we can be competitive with each other. And I'll say, oh, I'm super clever. I'm super smart. And you'll be like, yeah, but I'm super clever. I'm super smart. And I'll be like, I'm super clever, but I'm super smart. And we get this kind of who's the cleverest thing happening. And in that, there's really no space for me to know you or you to know me, or for us to discover the context and the contexts of where we can go when we don't know where we're going together. Who
Mm.
can you be when you don't know? Who am I when I don't know? I don't know what to do here. And you look around this world right now, no one knows what to do. We don't know what to do. Every time we come up with a really groovy model, it looks like it's perfect on the paper, but then the people involved can't talk to each other. They can't get along. They can't figure out how to be living in a way with each other that would allow new things to take place. So here we are. And communication is sacred.
Mm.
What I mean by that is that all of life is a constant communing. Your cells, your microbiome with your cells and your microbiome and your nervous system and your family and your economy, your community, your culture, the ecology you live within, all the way up to international political treaties and nonsense.
Mm.
It's communication that makes life. How do the organisms in a meadow communicate? What's happening in their forms and their informing that allows them to be in a communication that is a relationship? A relationship is made of communication. Um, so for me, I would like to start with communication is sacred. And that means that manipulating it and exaggerating it and trying to get your way and trying to win, and that all of these processes really undermine our capacity to be in something slower, something deeper, something more alive.
Mm.
Um, if you slow down, then the communication can become richer. And as it becomes more filled with contextual information, the understanding and the possibility of being in a relationship changes. If I'm looking at you and I'm like, yeah, you know, young woman with podcast, I have not seen you.
Mm.
I have not seen you. I haven't met you. I don't, the possibility of where we can actually contact and learn from each other has not even begun. Right. So communication is sacred.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's so easy to sort of fall into that, yeah, that limiting stories of it, of the people that we meet, that we put
Mm,
people into boxes, like you mentioned, young girl with podcast, or like whoever we meet, that we make up all these stories and ideas and that we think we know so much. And I noticed when you shared this thing about how in communication it's easy to, yeah, to sort of this idea that we need to know things or like prove ourselves, or I noticed when you talked about it, my shoulders sort of dropped and felt like, yeah, I was picturing a world where we don't need that anymore. Like, what
mm,
if we could approach ourselves and each other with curiosity and like openness, and the idea of not knowing, like what could
mm-hmm.
happen in that space, felt liberating to explore that idea. Yeah. I know something else that I'm curious to explore with you in this conversation is this idea, and I heard you mention the word model, different models, methods, and I think we're living in a society where a lot of people are approaching change with the lens of like finding different models that will solve our problems in many different like systemic levels. And so I'm curious to hear from your perspective, how do you think upon models, methods, and what is really needed to create change? Like, do you think that different models will help us transform the world or our relationships to ourselves or whatever we want to transform? Or is there something else that is needed? Maybe that's a leading question, but
Well, I mean, I think first of all, it's if you look at, big geopolitical structures, economies, industrial food, big pharma, high tech maneuverings, the industrial weapons economy. Okay, let's call it what it is. It's an economy. Um, that on in that shelf, it definitely appears that what we need to do is restructure the game, and that would look like a model. And I understand why that makes sense at that in that particular sort of you know layer of skin, if you will. There is no model that you can place upon a community that they are going to abide by if they can't talk to each other. You can't even put a model in a family. Have you tried to create a system in a family where everybody has a particular night they even do dishes? They always find a way out of it, right? So it's not about whose night it is to do dishes. It's about, can the family, everybody in the family, perceive what's in the relationship, who needs the night off, what needs to happen. And that doesn't come by creating a model. The model actually obscures that possibility of perception. So I'm not anti-model, but I'm not in favor at all of models that have information about how people should live, think, feel, dream, or worship. Those models, no.
Throw them out.
Throw them out because they cannot hold. I mean, people will rebel. If you tell them how to think, there's two possibilities. One is that they lap it up, in which case you get very, very weird authoritarian cult-like behavior. Or they rebel, in which case you get revolution.
Mm.
So models don't sit well with us. We're living creatures. We change, we move, we're wiggly. You know, that's what we were just talking about. Systems, communities are not static. It's not like it's a thing. It's people coming and going, and they've got ancestral traumas, and they've got things that they're carrying, and their way that they're communicating. And so this idea that you can just plop something in there and tell them how to believe, how to think, how to feel, you should be more compassionate. What? What does that mean? Compassionate toward who? You should have trust. Trust in who? Why? There's a lot of communities in this world that should not be trusting. There's a lot of ways in which compassion does not look like squishy, happy, rosy kindness,
Mm.
right? So I'm not a fan of any of these models that are constructed, first of all, in a Western cultural set of definitions. And second of all, that then pretend to be accessing the systemic process that makes a community or a human being or a family learn. For
Mm.
me, that territory is sacred, and it is not for you and I to tamper with. We can produce possibilities into which people can respond, but their responses are their own.
Mm. Yeah, it makes sense. And I think also part of my own like frustration when it comes to how we use models today is also like, for example, here in Sweden, there's such a rise of like giving diagnosis to young people, like everyone, not everyone, but a lot of young people get the diagnosed ADHD, for example, and then sort of we look upon these people and we put the label on them, and then just because someone has ADHD, then we know like this is the model we're going to use to solve the
Mm-hmm.
problem. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it becomes so limiting because just because you have sort of one diagnosis, maybe there's different patterns, different sort of balances or unbalances that needs to be looked upon. So I think it becomes so limiting when using models in that way. So I think that's part of my own frustration with
So
the whole
that's
idea.
it's a super interesting example because there's an enormous percentage of school kids that are on some kind of um, psychological medication in Sweden. And it's a system right? Of, like you said, of diagnostics, of having a particular externalized set of descriptions of behavior that are supposed to manifest a particular diagnosis. Um, and that's one set of systems, but there's another set of systems, which is the set of systems that is the school system. And it's very interesting to me that when you have such high percentages, I mean, isn't it around 50%, something like
I
that?
think so, yeah.
Um, Such high percentages of kids in a system that are unable to contend with it, that the idea is to medicate the kids and not
Mm.
change the system. So somewhere there's a system that's holding that education system static. We can't change this. Why? Why? Well, because of these other systems that are built on that system. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is that if you try to fix it in any one direction, you're going to actually make a bigger mess. So um, I love that example because it's something very dear to my heart.
Mm.
And I
What do
have,
you,
yeah, a
mm,
lot of concern for where the kids are right now.
yeah. And I think it's what you're pointing towards, like, is so interesting, and it makes me question, like, how far does it need to go before the system changes? Like the
Mm-hmm.
school system, the educational system. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's a sort of a limit, like it has to reach this sort of point before we realize that the system is what needs to change, not the children?
Um, I think that what we're looking at is a trans-contextual situation. And so, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the children's well-being, um, let's just look at that. Let's look at the children's well-being. How much are the parents working? How much time do they have to be with their kids? When they have time, are they with their kids? How is the culture supporting the parent-child relationship? I live in Sweden, and I have noticed that there are two teams. And when my stepkids have friends over, they're on team kid, and they are not expected to hang out with the grown-ups and have conversations. This is way, way far away from the way I grew up or the way my kids were brought up. Um, the whole thing of having friends over is that your parents get to know your friends, and by getting to know your friends, they get to know you and you know them, and everybody gets to know each other, and that makes everyone more held in a system of relationships. So when they say, I'm going to a party with so and so, you're like, okay, tell them I say hi. If you guys need anything, let me know. And there's no break there. So that split is a culture. So there's culture in there. There's economics in there. There's also intergenerational. What kind of relationship did the parents have with their parents? And how has that relationship changed over the generations? Then there's the legal system. So the way that the law says you can't even miss 4 days of school to go have an experience that you would actually learn a great deal from, right? Or the way that the standardized testing um, asks kids to basically all be able to perform in the same way, and they don't. There's that beautiful cartoon of the bird and the elephant and the monkey and the giraffe. And the teacher says, we're going to make the test the same for everyone so that everyone we can find out. And of course, the test is climb a tree. Well, the fish and the bird and the giraffe and the are not going to be able to do that. So again, you're looking at these models, the model of the test, the model of the school system, the model of the work system, the model of the family. So all of these systems are actually creating a perfect storm. And this question that you're asking of, well, when does it break? And I think it is breaking when you have this kind of percentage of kids in trouble and parents that are not knowing what to do and economies that will not sustain their independence and a culture that decides that they will not be considered success if they are not independent. So that's a problem right there. One of the questions I like to ask is, how would you raise your children differently if you knew they were never leaving home?
Mm. Mm.
Because so
Wow.
much of the way we raise our kids is all laced with this implicit messaging. You need to know this because one day I won't be here. You got to get a job. You got to get your apartment. You're one day when you're married and gone, one day when you have your place, right? And that messaging is laced into everything. And what if that,
Independence.
yeah, you
Mm.
have to be independent? What if independence isn't the future? What if it's interdependence? I'm pretty
Mm.
sure it is.
Mm. Mm.
We don't know how to do interdependence. We haven't got the foggiest idea. And this is true, I think, some cultures really do still have this. Asian cultures, Latin cultures, you will see that there is a real intergenerational obligation. Um, but you heard the word I used.
Mm.
It's an obligation.
Mm.
And I just think it's interesting. We have so much discussion about community and collaboration as though one could still be completely independent
Mm.
in that process. No way. You have deep obligations that will pinch you when you're in those kind of relationships and you're paying attention to the relationship. It's not comfortable. It's not anonymous. You can't just, do me. What about me?
Mm.
What's in it for me?
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable to
Mm.
um to be there for other people, to cover for them.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. I think when it comes to like the topic of change, of transformation, um, and when it comes to you use the words sustainable, and so the question that I would like to ask you is really like when it comes to creating a more sustainable world,
Mm.
what do you think are some of the sort of collective beliefs as a society that needs to be changed in order to create a more sustainable world or society? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it for me, okay, so this we talked a little bit about aphanipoesis, this crazy word that I made up. Aphani means unseen, and poesis means becoming. So it's a way of looking at how there is a lot of unseen change that later becomes something you might call emergence. But by the time it's emerged, it's been cooking for a long time. So I'm looking at what are those things that have come together for long periods of time that no one's been paying attention to, that then start to come up and become emergent. And so honestly, I think that there's quite a bit of cracking right now that's taking place, even in the classroom, around neurodivergence, around all these questions around colonial education, colonialism, around all sorts of questions around gender, around the whole question of ableism. And that these things are actually deeply shifting the music that we're listening to. It's shifting the idea of um, what is beautiful, how we think about being in partnership. So what I'm pointing to here is that the way there is a combining of these different cracks in formerly familiar, fairly static Western cultural epistemological concepts. Um, these cracks are forming a new harmony, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You cannot organize a classroom to get to a standardized test when you have this demand for differentiation in different kinds of expression, different ways of learning, different histories of knowing, different ideas of knowledge, different, right? So it just doesn't work. And I think that's exciting. I don't know where it's going. Could be a little chaotic. I don't know if there's anything we're here for in the next decades, though, if it's not chaos.
Mm,
So my main concern is not how does it change, but just how do we be with each other through it? Because how does it change will be changed by how we are being together through it.
mm,
If we are not able to be together, we're looking at blood in the streets and war and every kind of polarization and divisiveness you can imagine. Already we're seeing that. This person is an immigrant. That person is an anti-vaxxer. That one's a right winger. That one's a left winger. This one's a communist. That one's a, right? That one's a vegan and that one's a carnivore and that one is a, a million different shades of reasons to not be with each other.
mm,
So I don't think the question is what the model is. I don't think the question is even how do we orchestrate sustainability. I think the question really is how do we begin to care?
mm,
How do you care? Because I know that my clothes are somewhere dyed in poison that's hurting somebody's mom, that, that there's children who are mining the things for my phone. I know that there's some fat cat in the electrical corporation that's getting super rich while my neighbor can hardly live in their house in winter. I know. So where is that part where we cover for each other
mm,
and we say we're going to help each other through this in ways that are not monetary? Something has to not be for sale. And that's our relationship. That's our communication. That can't be for sale.
mm. What a beautiful way to sort of start to wrap this conversation up with that statement. Um, Before wrapping up, is there any question that you feel like, yeah, that I haven't asked you that you feel like this question is needed right now in this conversation?
No, but I have something. I could read you a poem.
Yes, please
How about
do.
that? Okay.
Yes.
I want to read you this poem that I've been thinking about through this whole conversation. It's called
Mm,
How Do You Pack?
mm,
See, think. Said 218, just a second. So this is out of combining my new book.
mm,
How do you pack? I do not long for how things were before, nor do I long for some fabricated future utopia. I do not long for things or money or status. I do not long for more time or even for fixing the broken corners of my heart. I feel the upending of so much that has needed to be upended for so long. But I do not long for the chaos. It comes like a fever to a sick body. I do not know what a healthy system would be like. I do not know how to long for it. How do you pack when you have no idea where you're going?
Mm, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Thank you for reading that poem. Such a beautiful reminder.
It just
Mm.
felt like the right one for
Yes,
this
yes, yes.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you pack when you have no idea where you're going? Ah, so beautiful. Thank you, Nora. For the listeners who would like to get in touch with you and your work, how can they reach you?
I'm really easy to reach, too easy probably, because I can't keep up with any of my communication processes anymore. But I'm on every possible platform. I don't use Twitter anymore, but I still have an account there, I think. Um, but there's the International Bateson Institute website, there's the Warm Data websites, there's all the usual suspects in terms of social media, and
Mm.
lots of interesting things happening. So
Beautiful. And I will put a link to your website under the description of this episode so they can easily find you there as well.
thank you.
A question that I normally ask all my guests on the show is if you would get the opportunity to reach the whole world for 30 seconds, what
Mm.
would you like to say to them or do with them, Laura?
The whole world for 30 seconds. I think there's a way that I would like to actually just be in silence,
Mm,
because silence is not silent, right? Silence is filled with communication,
mm,
but communication beyond words. Um, yeah, I think that is sort of where I'm feeling the need, is the communication that is beyond words now,
mm. Yes.
whether it's artistic or just in silence, or whether it's in gesture,
Mm.
whatever it is.
Thank you, Nora, for this hour and all the important perspectives and the wisdom that you have shared with us today. It means so much to have you here. So thank you for this hour.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for being here with us today, for showing up for the expansion of your own mind and your own heart in this space. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love it if you took a moment to share this conversation on your story and tag me so that we can keep the conversation going even after the end of this episode. And another way to support the show is to leave a review in the app where you're listening. I'm so looking forward to hear your reflections, your perspectives, and insights after listening to this conversation. Once again, thank you for being here with us today.